She married the cruel Alpha to break the curse, never knowing her Omega blood was the secret behind it. The letter came with blood on the seal. Elara Voss noticed it the moment the pack messenger dropped the envelope on her work table and stepped back without a word. The dark red wax pressed flat in the shape of a claw mark. She had seen that seal before, on wanted boards and trade agreements, and the borders of territory maps where other wolves refused to go. It belonged to one man, one Alpha, and that man did not send letters to nobody Omegas who lived at the edge of the territory and spent their days grinding herbs into paste. She did not open it right away. She finished wrapping the broken wrist of old Cora sitting across from her, tucking the linen tight and smooth, and she waited until the woman had gone before she sat down and broke the seal with her thumb. The letter was short. 3 lines. You are required at the Ironmore estate by dawn on the 3rd day. Bring nothing that cannot fit in a single bag. The Alpha requests your presence for a matter that concerns the entire territory. There was no signature. There was no explanation. There was only the claw seal at the bottom and the quiet certainty that refusal was not an option anyone had considered including in the message. Elara set the letter face down on the table. Through the small window of her workroom, the trees at the edge of the Ironmore border stood bare and dark. They had looked like that for years now. Everyone pretended not to notice how the bark had turned gray from the roots up, how the fruit trees near the settlement had stopped giving fruit for the 2nd season in a row, how the river that ran through the territory's center had dropped low enough to show stones that used to sit deep underwater. The territory was sick. Everyone knew it. No one said it too loud, because saying it loud meant admitting that the curse was real, and admitting the curse was real meant confronting what had caused it. She folded the letter. She put it in her coat pocket. She did not sleep that night. By the first light of the 3rd dawn, Elara stood at the iron gate of the estate, with one bag over her shoulder, and a calm expression she had practiced all the way up the hill road. The gate opened before she knocked. A guard in a gray uniform led her inside without greeting her, down a corridor of dark stone that smelled of pine resin and cold, and into a hall so large that her footsteps echoed. He was already there when she entered. Cale Dravin stood at the far end of the hall with his back to her, studying a map spread across a wide table. He did not turn immediately. She had time to take in the width of his shoulders, the sharp line of his jaw when he finally did turn, and the complete absence of any warmth in his eyes when they found her. He was younger than the stories suggested, or rather age had nothing to do with what he was. He was the kind of man built not from years but from decisions, and every decision he had ever made had been hard and deliberate and final. That was what showed in his face. Not cruelty for its own sake, but the absolute absence of softness. He had removed softness from himself, the way a wolf removes a thorn, efficiently, without sentiment. He looked at her, the way someone looks at a document they are verifying. Elara Voss, he said. It was not a greeting. That is my name, she replied. Something shifted in his expression, barely. She had the sense he had not expected her to respond without hesitation. You know why you are here, he said. No, she said. Your letter did not explain. He walked to the near side of the table and stood with his hands behind his back. The seer identified you 2 weeks ago. Before that, I had no knowledge of your existence. The pack elders confirmed your status as an unmated Omega. You have no pack bond, no family claim, no territory contract. Legally, you belong to no one. The way he said it was not cruel. It was simply true, and he was the kind of man who said true things plainly. But it still landed with a kind of weight. What does the seer want with me? Elara asked. She does not want anything with you. She said the territory does. He paused. The bloodless curse requires a willing bond, an Omega who enters the Alpha bloodline freely. The seer gave us your name. You are the one. The silence in the hall was complete. Elara did not move. She turned the words over carefully, the way she would turn a herb between her fingers to identify it before using it on a wound. You are asking me to marry you, she said. Yes, and you are asking because a seer told you to. Yes, and if I refuse. He held her gaze without blinking. The territory continues to die. 2 more families left last season. The pack is fracturing. By next winter, we may not have enough wolves to defend our borders. The curse is not a myth told to frighten children. It is real, and it is killing Ironmore from the inside, and you are the only answer that has been given. Elara looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the gray trees. She thought about the sick pups she had treated in the lower settlement, the ones born underweight and struggling to breathe. She thought about Cora's granddaughter, who had miscarried twice in 1 year, and sat in Elara's workroom and cried without making a sound, because she had learned not to ask for too much comfort. She thought about her mother's grave on the hill behind the cottage where she had grown up. Her mother, who had raised her alone and taught her every herb, and told her that the most important thing an Omega could be was useful to someone who needed her. "I will agree," Elara said, "but I have a condition." Kale went very still. It was clear no one had ever offered him a condition. "When the curse breaks," she said, "the Omegas of this territory are granted equal standing, no forced bonds, no rank assignment without consent. That goes into the territory law, signed and sealed, before the ceremony." He stared at her. "You are asking me to restructure the territory's ranking system," he said. "I am asking you to make it fair," she said. "If my bond is what breaks the curse, then what I bond myself to matters. I will not be the reason Ironmore survives if surviving means the same Omegas who were already suffering continue to suffer under a different alpha." The silence stretched between them. She did not fill it. She held his gaze and waited. And the waiting was perhaps the hardest thing she had ever done, because every part of her understood how much power stood across that table from her, and how little she technically had. "Agreed," he said finally. She breathed. They were bound by pack contract 2 days later, with the elders as witnesses, and Kale's signature beside hers, on a territory amendment she had drafted herself the night before. No ceremony, no celebration, a signing in a cold room with candles that smelled of wax and old wood, and then a guard escorting Elara to a wing of the estate she had never seen before. The room they gave her was larger than her entire cottage. She sat on the edge of the bed with her bag still over her shoulder and looked at the stone walls and the dark window, and the lamp someone had already lit on the bedside table. She was not afraid. Fear was a thing she had decided would not be useful, so she had set it down somewhere on the road up the hill and left it there. She was, however, very aware that she had just married the most feared alpha in 4 territories, based on 3 lines in a letter and a condition about fairness. She unpacked her bag. She organized her herbs in a row on the windowsill. She lay down on the bed with her hands folded on her chest and stared at the ceiling until the candle burned low. In the morning, she would begin. The territory needed her. She was here. That was enough to start with. What she did not know, lying there in the quiet of that first night, was that the moment she had crossed the estate's threshold, something in the ground beneath her feet had shifted. Something old and waiting had recognized her. Not her name, not her choice, not the contract she had signed. Her blood. It had recognized her blood. And deep in the cursed roots of Ironmore, after 40 years of waiting, something had finally begun to move. Elara woke before the estate did. She had always been that way. Up before the light, before the birds, before the world remembered to arrange itself into something that made sense. It was a habit from her years of early herb gathering, when the dew was still heavy and the plants held their oils closest in the cold. She dressed quietly, tied her hair back, and slipped out of her room into the long stone corridor. No one stopped her. The guards she passed gave her brief, unreadable looks, but no one spoke. She got the sense that Kale's household ran on a rule of silence, that unnecessary words were a currency not wasted here. She found the estate's rear door on her own and stepped out into the gray morning. The grounds behind the estate were wide and mostly dead. That was the only word for it. The grass grew thin and pale. The flower beds along the stone wall had given up some time ago and left only dried stems, and the 2 oak trees near the far fence had shed all their bark on one side, leaving pale wood exposed like a wound. She walked to the nearest one and pressed her palm flat against the exposed wood. It was cold, much colder than it should have been, even in autumn. She stood there for a moment with her eyes closed, feeling the way a tree feels when it is fighting. There was still life in it. Deep, stubborn, refusing to give in, but it was tired. She went back inside and started working. She found the estate's storage room on her own, cataloged what herbs and medicines were kept there, and made a list of what was missing and what was needed. Then she went to the lower settlement on foot, without asking permission and without telling anyone. because asking permission for healing felt wrong in a way she could not explain but absolutely trusted. The settlement was quieter than it should have been for a weekday morning. She counted 4 families visible on the main road, where there should have been 20. The market stalls were half empty. A woman carrying a child on her hip watched Elara pass with flat, careful eyes, the look of someone who had learned to be cautious about new faces. Elara stopped. She smiled. She said good morning. The woman blinked, clearly surprised, and said good morning back. That was how it started. Within the hour, Elara was sitting in the woman's kitchen, whose name was Nora, drinking tea that tasted like it had been steeped too long because Nora was nervous, and listening to everything Nora had kept inside for the better part of 3 years. The sick children, the wolves who had left for neighboring territories, the rumor that the Alpha had brought in an outsider to break the curse, and no one knew if that was hope or desperation or both. Elara listened. She asked questions. She wrote things down in the small notebook she kept in her coat pocket, the one with the battered cover and the ink stains on the inside of the front page. By midday, she had visited 6 houses. By the time she walked back up the hill toward the estate, she had a full list of who needed help, what kind, and what she could realistically do with what was available. She did not see Kale until the evening meal. It was not a warm occasion. The 2 of them sat at a long table built for 20, with a meal served by a staff member who moved quietly and left without making eye contact. Elara ate without rushing, occasionally glancing at Kale, who ate without looking at her at all. It was Elara who spoke first. The settlement in the lower quarter has at least a dozen children showing signs of iron deficiency. 2 are severe enough that they need proper supplementation immediately. I need a list of what medicinal plants the territory's supply routes include. I also need a room in this estate I can use as a workroom. Something with good light and a sink. Kale set down his fork. He looked at her across the long table with the expression of someone hearing something they did not expect in a language they understand perfectly, but had not anticipated being spoken. "You went to the settlement today," he said. "Yes?" "Without informing anyone." "I did not know I needed permission to help sick children," she said. "If there is a rule against it, I would like to know now so I can decide how I feel about that rule." The pause that followed was the kind that could go in either direction. She held his gaze without apology. "There is no rule against it," he said. "Good," she said. "Then the workroom." He looked at her for another moment. Then he picked up his fork again. "I will have one prepared tomorrow. You will also have access to the supply logs. Give your list to the household manager in the morning." "Thank you," she said. He said nothing else. But when she glanced at him near the end of the meal, she noticed his attention had drifted toward her notebook, sitting beside her plate. He looked away the moment she noticed. She did not remark on it. Over the following weeks, Elara built her healing practice from scratch inside the estate's south-facing room, which turned out to have 3 large windows and excellent drainage. She requested supplies. She trained 2 young Omega women from the settlement who had expressed interest in healing work. She visited the lower quarter twice a week and the outer farms once, and she kept records of everything she saw. The land, she noticed, was responding. Not quickly. Not in any way that could be called miraculous. But the iron-sick children who took her tonic began to gain color in their cheeks. The young mother who had lost 2 pregnancies the previous year carried her 3rd into the 2nd month, then the 3rd, and Elara checked on her every week and said nothing dramatic, just kept checking. A section of the garden near the estate's east wall, the one she had quietly turned over and replanted with nitrogen-fixing herbs, began to show green. The elders said nothing out loud, but she caught them watching her, and she caught Kale watching them, watching her, which was almost more interesting. He never came to her workroom uninvited, but she started to find things. A jar of dried elderflower left outside her door one morning, the kind not available in the local supply. A copy of the territory's original land records, which she had mentioned offhandedly at dinner, as something that might help her understand the soil patterns. Small things, delivered without acknowledgement. She never thanked him out loud for them, because he never admitted to leaving them, and she respected the logic of that arrangement. One evening, she came back late from the farms to find him in the corridor outside her workroom. He was not waiting. He was standing at the window at the end of the hall, looking out at the grounds in the dark. "There is new growth on the east wall," he said, without turning. "I know," she said. "I planted it last month. It should not be growing this time of year. I added a soil-warming base, Volcanic grit from the eastern supply. It holds heat. She paused. But that is not the only reason it is growing. He turned then, and looked at her with the focused, measuring attention she had come to understand was how he showed curiosity. He did not ask open-ended questions. He waited to see if she would continue. The territory is trying to heal, she said. Whatever the curse did, it did not kill the land's instinct to grow. It is suppressed, not gone. Every time I help something recover, it is like giving the territory permission. Like the land has been waiting for someone to believe it could get better. Kale was quiet for a moment. You speak about the land as if it is a patient, he said. It is, she said simply. He looked at her for another moment. Not the way he looked at documents. Something else, something she did not name. The seer wants to meet with you, he said. She has asked twice. I have been deciding whether to pass that on. Elara raised her eyebrows. Why would you delay it? Because Marin says things that cannot be unsaid, he replied. And I did not know yet whether you were the kind of person who needed to hear them, or the kind who was better without them. What kind do you think I am now? She asked. He considered it. Genuinely. The way he considered everything. The first kind, he said. Then pass it on, she said. She walked past him toward her room, and he did not follow, and neither of them said good night. But as she turned the corner, she heard his footsteps pause, and then continue in the opposite direction, and she had the distinct sense that he was walking slower than he had arrived. She lay awake again that night, not from fear this time. From the feeling she had been carrying for 3 weeks without knowing what to call it. The feeling that something in this territory was connected to something in her, in a way she did not yet understand. That when she pressed her hand to the cold bark of a dying tree, something pressed back. That when she healed, she was not only giving, something was giving back. She pressed her palm flat on the stone floor beside her bed, the way she had pressed it against the oak. The stone was cold, but under the cold, very faint, like the last ember in a fire that has almost gone out, she felt something warm. She pulled her hand back and stared at it in the dark. In 3 days, she would meet Marin, and nothing after that would stay the same. Marin did not come to the estate. She sent a note directing Elara to a place called the Gray Stone, which turned out to be a boulder the size of a small house sitting at the edge of the old forest, half buried and carved over with symbols so worn by weather that they were more felt than read. Elara found it on her own, on a cold morning with fog still sitting low over the grass. Marin was already there. She was not what Elara had expected, though Elara had told herself not to expect anything. She was not ancient in the visible sense. Her hair was dark with threads of silver, her face lined at the eyes and mouth in a way that spoke of weather and thought rather than age, and she sat on a low root with her hands folded in her lap, like someone who had been sitting in that exact spot for years and planned to continue. She looked at Elara with eyes that did not inspect or measure, but simply saw, the way very few people are capable of seeing, and that alone was enough to make Elara's breath go careful. Sit, Marin said. Elara sat on a root across from her. You have been feeling it, Marin said. Not a question. Something under the ground, Elara said. When I touch the land, when I heal someone, and the healing takes faster than it should, there is a warmth, a kind of response. Yes, Marin said simply. What is it? Marin reached into the fold of her coat and drew out a small cloth. She unfolded it on her knee and held it out. Inside was a fragment of carved bone, old and yellowed, small enough to fit in a closed fist. It was marked with a symbol. Simple. A circle with a line through it. And from the line, 3 short branches, like a bare tree or a river delta. Elara looked at it. Something in her chest moved. Not a feeling she could name, more like a sound heard from very far away, almost below hearing, that she recognized anyway. I have seen that mark, she said. My mother drew it once, in the margin of an old book. I asked her what it was, and she said it was nothing. Old writing. It is not old writing, Marin said. It is a lineage mark. It belongs to the Thornblood family. Elara went very still. Every wolf in the territory knew the name, not because it was taught, but because it was not taught, which was its own kind of teaching. The Thornblood family had been a pack of Omegas, a complete pack, which was unusual enough to be remembered. They had lived in the heart of what was now Ironmore territory, 3 generations back. They had been healers, record keepers, land stewards, and the Alpha who ruled Ironmore at the time, had ordered their destruction. Every member, because an Omega pack that held the trust and loyalty of the common wolves, was a power structure he could not control, and he had not been the kind of man who tolerated things he could not control. The massacre had happened in winter. The elders who were old enough to remember said the land had gone quiet afterward, that the birds had stopped singing for a week, that the river had dropped 6 inches in a single night. The curse, most believed, had begun the morning after. Elara stared at the bone fragment in Marin's hand and felt the edges of a truth she was not yet ready to hold. "Tell me," she said. Marin was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was level, not gentle, but not hard either. Simply careful, the way someone is careful when they are carrying something fragile and know it. "One woman survived," Marin said. "She was not at the settlement when the Alpha's enforcers came. She had gone to the outer hills for a plant harvest. She came back to Ash. She was young. She was unmated. She was terrified. She ran to the eastern border and crossed into neutral territory, and she changed her name and cut her hair and told no one what she was or where she was from." Elara's hands were flat on her knees. She could feel the root beneath her, solid and cold through her trousers. "She had a daughter years later," Marin continued. "That daughter had a daughter. And that daughter was raised on the edge of Ironmore territory by a mother who never explained why she kept certain books buried rather than shelved, or why she drew old symbols in the margins and called them nothing, or why she told her child above everything else to learn to heal, to be useful, to know how to give something to the world that no one could take back." The morning was very quiet. The fog had not lifted. The old forest stood at their backs without sound. Elara said, "My mother." "Yes," Marin said. "And her mother." "Yes. And her mother before that was the woman who survived." Marin folded the cloth back over the bone and held it out. Elara took it without thinking, the way you take something that was already yours. "I am Thornblood," Elara said. Not a question, not a cry, just the shape of it, said aloud to hear how it settled. "You are the last of them," Marin said, "which is why the seer's reading pointed to you, and no one else. The curse was not written as punishment with no solution. It was written as a lock with a specific key. The land did not go dark to punish every Alpha who came after. It went dark because the wound at its center was the destruction of a bloodline, and the only thing that could address a wound like that was the return of that bloodline. Freely, by choice, not dragged back in chains but walking back through the gate willingly." Elara thought about the letter with blood on the seal. She thought about herself, standing at that gate, choosing to cross. "The blood remembers," Marin said quietly, "even when the person carrying it does not know. Your hands have been healing this territory from the day you arrived, not only with herbs and knowledge, but with something older. Every Thornblood who ever lived understood the land as a living thing, as something to be tended and answered. That is what your blood carried forward. That is why the East Wall Garden grows in cold season. That is why the iron-sick children recover faster under your care than they would under anyone else's. You are not just healing individuals, you are healing the territory's memory of what it is supposed to be." Elara sat with this for a long time. The fog began to lift, very slowly, pulling back from the grass in thin threads. "Does Kale know?" she asked. "He knows the prophecy required Omega blood. He does not know whose blood specifically. He did not know the Thornblood survivor had descendants. Almost no one did. The records were destroyed deliberately. Who destroyed them? The Alpha who ordered the massacre. He wanted no evidence that the family had ever existed. He nearly succeeded." Marin looked at Elara evenly. "Your grandmother kept the bone fragment. It was the only thing she took when she ran." Elara looked down at the cloth in her hands. "If Kale had known," she said slowly, "would he have used me differently? More deliberately?" "That," Marin said, "is the question worth asking." "I am not asking you," Elara said. "I know that is not something you can answer." "No," Marin agreed. "It is not." The quiet stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but full of the kind of weight that certain truths carry when they have only just been spoken for the first time. "What does the curse still need?" Elara asked. "I have been healing. The land is responding. But it is not broken. I can still feel the edge of it, like a door that is open a crack but has not been fully pushed through. Marin was quiet for a moment. Acknowledgement, she said finally. The land's wound is not only the destruction of the bloodline, it is also the denial. The Alpha who ordered it did not only kill the Thornbloods, he erased them, told the remaining pack they had never existed, built the territory's history over a deliberate silence. The land cannot fully heal while that silence holds, while the wrong done in its soil is still officially nothing. Someone needs to name it, Elara said. Yes. Publicly. Yes. The Alpha, Elara said. Yes. She understood then what the final piece was, and she understood that it would cost something. Not from her this time. From Kale. From a man who had taken power by force, who ruled a territory built on a buried crime, who had married her without knowing he had brought the key to a door he had not realized was keeping the whole land locked. She thought about the lamp left burning in the corridor, the elderflower outside her door, the way he had said she was the first kind of person when he meant the kind who could bear the truth. She thought about what it was going to take to walk back into that estate and tell him everything. She stood up from the root, brushed the cold from her trousers, and looked at Marin. Thank you, she said. Marin nodded once. She did not say you are welcome. She did not say good luck. She simply watched Elara go with the calm expression of someone who already knew how the next part would go, and had decided the person walking into it was capable of it. Elara walked back through the fog with the cloth in her coat pocket, pressed flat against her ribs. She had come to Ironmore as a tool, as a name on a seer's list, as a body with the right biological status to satisfy a prophetic condition. She was walking back as herself, as the last of a line that someone had tried to erase from history, as a woman who had been healing the land with blood she had not known was significant, making choices she had not known were healing something deeper than sickness. She was walking back to do one more thing. She was going to walk into Kale Draven's study without knocking, and she was going to hand him the heaviest piece of truth she had ever carried, and she was going to watch what he did with it. Whatever came next would depend entirely on what kind of man he chose to be in that moment. She had a theory about which way he would choose. She had not yet decided if she trusted the theory enough to be frightened by it. She walked faster. Elara did not knock. She had decided on the road back that she would not, because knocking felt like asking permission to speak, and this was not a conversation that required anyone's permission. She opened the door of Kale's study and stepped inside. He was at the large table with maps spread over it, the same table he had been standing at the day she arrived, but this time he had papers stacked beside it as well, and an open record book, and 2 empty cups that told her he had been there for hours. He looked up immediately when the door opened. His expression moved through brief surprise, and then settled into the usual still attention. He did not tell her to knock next time. He waited. She crossed the room and stood on the opposite side of the table from him, the cloth from Marin pressed flat in her coat pocket, her hands at her sides. I met with Marin this morning, she said. I know, he said. I saw you leave. Then you know I have been gone most of the day. Yes. She held his gaze. There are things I need to tell you. Some of them are going to be difficult to hear. I am going to ask you to listen without interrupting until I am finished. He set down the pen in his hand. He stepped back slightly from the table, giving her the space of his full attention in the way that was particular to him, without warmth but without dismissal either. Go ahead, he said. She told him everything, the way Marin had told her, plainly and without decoration, because the truth did not need decoration to land. The Thornblood bloodline, the massacre, the survivor, the generations that had followed, moving under a changed name, carrying forward what they could not explain and could not set down. Her grandmother, her mother, herself. She told him what it meant that she was here, what her blood had been doing since she crossed the estate's threshold, what the curse required to fully break. She told him that the silence had to end, that the wrong done in the soil of his territory had to be named, publicly, by the Alpha standing over it. That acknowledgement was not optional, that the land would not release its hold on itself until the denial that had compounded the original harm was finally undone. She told him all of it. She watched him. He did not interrupt. He stood very still, the way he had stood on the day she had first seen him, and he listened with the complete attention that was one of the things she had quietly come to understand about him, Whatever else Kale was, he did not look away from hard things. When she finished, the study was quiet for a long moment. "The Alpha who ordered the massacre," he said finally. "He was my great-grandfather." "I know," Elara said. "I did not know what he had done," Kale said. "Not specifically. The territory records from that period are incomplete. I always assumed it was deliberate. I never investigated, because I told myself it was old history, and the territory needed me looking forward, not back." "That is an honest thing to say," Elara said. "It is not a good reason," he replied. "No," she agreed. "It is not." Another silence. He moved around the table slowly, not toward her, but toward the window, standing with his back half-turned to look out at the grounds. She could see his jaw working. He was processing something, working through it the way he worked through everything, with the careful, deliberate effort of a man who does not make decisions carelessly. "You came here not knowing any of this," he said. He was not looking at her. "You agreed to this arrangement without knowing what your blood was. You have been healing this territory for months, with no idea that you were the specific person the curse had been waiting for." "Yes," she said. He turned then. He looked at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. It was not soft. Nothing about Kale was soft. But there was something stripped away in it, something that had been sitting under the iron for a long time and was showing through a crack he had not entirely chosen to open. "I brought you here as a solution," he said. "I told myself it was strategy, that you were the means to an end that mattered, and that the individual behind the means was secondary." Elara said nothing. She let him continue. "I was wrong," he said. "Not about the curse, but about you being secondary." The room was very still. "I noticed it in the first week," he said. "You negotiated with me. No one negotiates with me. Every word you said in that hall was for someone other than yourself. You asked for the Omegas before you asked for anything for your own protection. I could not put it down." He paused. "I left the elderflower outside your door, because you mentioned once at dinner that the supply chains never include it, and it was the one herb you could not replicate locally. I thought it was a practical contribution to the work." "It was kind," Elara said quietly. "I am not a kind man," he said. "I know," she said. "That is why it mattered." He looked at her for a long moment. Something passed between them that neither of them named, because neither of them was the kind of person who named things before they were certain, and they were both standing at the edge of something they had not yet fully understood. "What does the acknowledgement need to look like?" he asked. She had not been sure, until this moment, which way he would go. She exhaled slowly. "A public gathering," she said. "The full pack. You stand at the territory's heartstone, and you speak the names of the Thornblood family. You say what was done. You do not ask forgiveness, because this is not about forgiveness. It is about the silence ending. And then you formalize what we already agreed on. The Omega Rights Amendment, stated publicly, in front of every wolf who needs to hear it. Half the old guard will see it as weakness," he said. "Some of them will. There may be challenges to my leadership. Probably," she said. "You will handle them." The corners of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, something adjacent to one. "You have a great deal of confidence in my ability to handle challenges," he said. "You are the most stubborn person I have ever met," she said. "I mean that as a compliment." He was quiet for another moment. "I will do it," he said. "Not because of the curse, because it is the right thing, and because it should have been done long before any of this." He held her gaze. "And because you stayed, when you found out what you were, when you came back from that forest with a truth that could have sent you running, you came here and told me. You gave me the chance to choose correctly, rather than simply doing it around me. That matters to me." Elara nodded once. "It should matter," she said. "It means you actually chose it." The ceremony was held 5 days later, at the Grey Heartstone at the center of Ironmore territory, in the early morning, when the light was low and cold, and all the shadows were long. Kale stood before his full pack and spoke the names of the dead. He said them clearly. He did not stumble. He named what had been done in his bloodline's name, and he named the silence that had followed as its own kind of harm, and he said that it ended here. Elara stood beside him, not behind him. When he finished, he did not wait for the crowd to respond. He turned to the Pack Council and announced the formal passage of the Omega Standing Amendment, effective immediately, as originally agreed, signed, and sealed. The silence that followed was enormous. Then Nora from the lower settlement, the woman who had given Elara tea steeped too long on the first day, started to cry. Not quietly, not privately. She simply let it happen, and 3 people around her put their hands on her shoulders. Kale reached for Elara's hand. He did not look at her when he did it. He simply reached, and she let him take it, and they stood together at the Heartstone while the weight of 40 years of wrong began, very slowly, to lift. The ground shuddered once beneath their feet, a deep, final exhale. And then the curse broke. Spring came to Ironmoor the way it had not come in decades. The border trees, the ones with the gray bark and the bare exposed wood, grew leaves in the first week of the new season. Not gradually, in a week. The old women in the settlement stood at their windows and watched it happen, and did not try to explain it. The river rose to where it should have been, and the current strengthened, and the stones disappeared back under clear water. The 2 oak trees in the estate grounds put out branches that were thick and full of green. Elara's east wall garden, which had already been growing against the season, filled in completely by mid-spring, and she had to expand it twice to accommodate the demand from wolves in the settlement, who came asking for what she grew there. She built the healing house the following month, stone, with a slate roof and 3 south-facing windows and a proper separate entrance, so that the people who came to see her did not need to go through the estate. The Pack Council signed off on it in a single session. 2 of the council members who had opposed Kale's acknowledgement statement most publicly came to the signing of the construction order and added their own marks without being asked, which Elara noted in her record book without comment. The young mother in the lower settlement had her child in late spring. A girl, healthy, loud, absolutely unremarkable in all the ways that make a healthy newborn a miracle. Elara sat with her through the long hours of it and walked home at dawn with mud on her boots and a tiredness in her whole body that felt like satisfaction. Kale was awake when she came in. He was in the kitchen, which was unusual for him, making tea with the focused concentration he applied to everything, including tasks that did not require it. He looked at her when she came through the door. "Good outcome?" he asked. "Very good," she said. He poured a second cup without asking, and set it on the table in front of the chair across from his. She sat down and wrapped both hands around it. They sat in the early quiet of the kitchen for a while without speaking, which was something they had become good at. Comfortable silence was, Elara had decided, one of the more underrated things 2 people could develop. It meant that the space between them did not need filling to be worth occupying. "The Pack Council wants to formalize the Omega advocacy role," Kale said eventually. "They are proposing it as an official territory position, a designated seat on the council." "That was fast," Elara said. "You have been doing the work unofficially for 7 months," he said. "The formalization is just the council catching up to reality." He paused. "I told them you would need to agree to the terms yourself, and that I would not be answering on your behalf." She looked at him over her cup. He met her gaze with the steady attention that was simply how he saw, and she thought again, as she had thought many times in the months that had passed, that he was not a different person than the one who had stood at that map table the day she arrived. He was the same person, but the same person could take up more or less of themselves, depending on what they chose to allow in, and Kale had, over 7 months of small and difficult choices, allowed in more than she had initially thought he was capable of. That was not softness. It was something harder to earn and more worth having. "I want to keep the healing house independent," she said, "not tied to the council seat." "Agreed," he said immediately. "And I want the Omega advocacy role to have binding authority over Pack policy that affects ranking and bonding, not advisory. Binding." He was quiet for a moment. "That will require a territory charter amendment." "I know. The old guard will not like it. You have survived their displeasure before," she said. The corners of his mouth moved. That almost smile that she had learned to read as genuine amusement, the kind he had not previously allowed himself. "Draft the terms," he said. "I will take them to the council." She nodded. She drank her tea. The morning was getting lighter through the kitchen window, the pale gold of early spring coming in over the grounds. Outside, the oak trees stood full and solid, their new branches moving slightly in the early air. Elara thought about her mother, who had raised her on the edge of someone else's territory and never explained why they stayed close to the border of a place she never entered, who had buried her family history in the margins of old books and called it nothing, who had given her daughter every skill needed to walk back into the land that had tried to erase their name without ever telling her daughter that was what she was preparing her for. She thought about her grandmother, running through the cold to the eastern border with ash on her clothes and one carved bone in her pocket and an entire world ending behind her, choosing to survive when surviving was the harder choice. She thought about what it meant to carry something you do not know you are carrying, and then to find out, and to decide that the weight is worth it. She set her cup down. "I want to put the Thornblood name in the territory record," she said. "Not just the acknowledgement statement, a proper entry, history, who they were, what they did here, what they built. There were records before the Alpha destroyed them. I want to reconstruct what I can from what Marin has, and what the oldest pack members remember." Kale looked at her steadily. "That is going to take a long time." "Yes," she said. "It might uncover things that make more people uncomfortable." "Probably," she said. "It should still be done." He nodded once, the decisive kind, the kind that meant the decision was made. "I will have the archive room made available to you," he said, "and I will send a formal request to the 3 neighboring territories, asking if any of their elders have records from that period. Some of them were neutral during what happened. They may have documentation." Elara looked at him. "You have already been thinking about this," she said. "Since the ceremony," he said. "I did not bring it up because I did not know if it was something you wanted help with or something you needed to own yourself." She was quiet for a moment. "Both," she said. "I need to own it, and I would like help with it." "Then you will have it," he said. The second ceremony, the one they held for themselves in the autumn without the elders and without any requirement beyond their own choice, was small. A fire in the evening, the pack gathered on the grass, and 2 people standing in front of it saying things they meant, because they had decided they wanted to say them, not because a contract or a prophecy required it. Elara had written her own words. She read them from the notebook with the battered cover, the one with ink stains on the inside of the front page, and she did not look away from him while she read. Kale had not written his. He had said, in the week before, that he did not want to read from a page because he wanted to know whether he had the words himself. She had respected that. He stood in the firelight and spoke without notes and said what he meant, plainly and without decoration, which was how he said everything, and it was exactly right. Marin attended. She sat to one side on a low chair someone had brought out for her, and watched the proceedings with her particular expression of patient knowing. Afterward, when the fire was lower and people had begun to drift toward the food and conversation that followed, Elara found the old seer at the edge of the gathering. "When you pointed Kale toward me," Elara said, "did you know it would go this way?" Marin considered this in her unhurried way. "I knew what the blood required," she said. "The prophecy told me the conditions, the Thornblood descendant, the willing bond, the return to the land. I knew those pieces." She paused. "I did not know what the 2 of you would do with each other. That part was not in any prophecy. That part was yours." Elara looked at the fire, at the people gathered around it, at the territory spread out beyond the estate grounds, green and growing and fully awake. She thought about all the things that had been decided for her before she arrived here, the bloodline she was born into, the curse that had been waiting, the seer's pointing finger, the letter with blood on the seal that had come to her table on an ordinary morning. She thought about all the things she had decided herself, every patient she had treated, every rule she had broken quietly and carefully, every time she had walked back through a door she could have chosen not to go back through. She thought about Kale reaching for her hand at the Heartstone without looking at her, the small private reaching that had happened in front of everyone and had meant more than anything formal or required. "We did well with it," Elara said. "Yes," Marin agreed. "You did." The fire was warm. The territory was alive. The name of the Thornblood family was written into the land's record in ink that would not be removed, and the last of that line stood in the firelight of the estate she had walked into with one bag over her shoulder and a condition about fairness, and felt something that she had not let herself feel for a very long time. At home. Not because the place had been given to her, because she had built what was real here, one small true thing at a time, with her hands and her knowledge and her stubborn refusal to become invisible, and the land had met her effort with its own, and together they had made something neither could have made alone. That was what the blood had always known. She had simply needed to live long enough to understand it. The healing house stood at the edge of the settlement in the morning light, and the door was open, and the people who needed it came and went, and the territory that had been dying breathed in full and steady. The wound was old, the healing was real, and the woman who had been chosen for her blood and stayed for her choice had written her own ending into a story that began long before she was born, and she had written it as something worth reading, something worth keeping, something that would not be buried again.